Welcome to Conscious TV. You're listening to Conscious TV with Ramon and Tom. And just want to run through some quick things before we introduce our guest, which is a very special guest. Don't forget, if you can, to donate. Me and Tom are blue-collar workers. Sometimes it feels more like green. But yeah, so if you're able to give something, we'll really highly appreciate it. And who do we have, Tom?
Well, how about we need to mention our the new paradigm page that we've got on the website, Ramon.
Yes, it completely slipped my mind. Make sure you scroll down when you go to the beginning. Let me give you the website. It's www.conscious-tv.com. And then scroll down to the fourth one after video links, which is called the New Paradigm Ideas. And there you can find ideas from natural pesticides to making terra petra to also making a house that's completely sustainable and natural from recycled materials. There's two different websites there. And if you have any ideas on how to create this new paradigm, this new shift, this new world, make sure you send us the emails and send us the link to any websites as well that's doing the same thing as us. Or that is doing more than us. The more information we get out there, the easier we can create this new world and get away from the old paradigm.
I'm going to start. I'm going to start finding some gardening stuff and stick on there. There are still some good outlets to buy heirloom seeds and that sort of thing. So I'll be getting.
Yeah, that's also very important. Yeah, especially with all the Monsanto crap.
Right. So. Just to let you guys know, Ramon and I, our main objective with this radio program is to get answers for people when they have questions and try to find some solutions to the quandary that we find ourselves in this world right now. And after interviewing this guest the first time, we could not help but pursue this young lady and try to pick her brain some more because she has some of the answers that I think that this world needs. We'd like to welcome back Crystal Clark, and we're hoping to do a series of shows here and try to get some more of your information out. Hello, Crystal.
Hi, Tom and Ramon. It's so nice to be back with you both.
Yay!
Hey! You guys were a lot of fun last time, so I'm happy to be back.
Well, that's great. So I know we need to try to start towards the beginning of things here, and we want to lay this out the best we can. And the most understandable anyways. And how about a little bit more background on you? What got you here, Crystal?
Well, I was really just a turnip on the truck like everybody else. And I had this encounter with a psychic in the year 2000. And it really changed my life. At the time, I didn't understand how important this meeting was. But the first thing this woman said to me was, you're not supposed to be doing what you're doing. You're supposed to be a writer and a healer. And, of course, I thought she was crazy, but she was a really wonderful woman, and we both really hit it off. And so I spent about an hour and a half with her. She gave me my future several years in advance. And I left that experience and really didn't think too much more about it because I was, like everybody else, I was living in the corporate world, making lots of money, had lots of respect from friends and family for the position that I held. But slowly but surely, the universe really encroached into my personal life and was really kind of shaking me, saying, why didn't you get it? That was your moment. That was your moment. That was basically, the universe saying, we were talking to you through this woman. Pay attention. It's important. And I didn't pay attention. I didn't understand it. And pretty soon my life really was kind of turned upside down to the point that I really wasn't given a choice. And so every part of my life was basically broken down to the point where I was left with nothing else to do but go back to that moment and look up at the universe and say, okay, I'll do it. I'll try it, and I'll see how it goes. And it took a few years of going through the process. I read lots and lots of books, metaphysical books especially, ancient civilization books, things of that nature. And then I began to see that everything was connected somehow, and that, of course, in the past, what we refer to now as science and religion were not separate teachings, and that in itself was very fascinating to me. But then I got to a place where, at first I thought, well, excuse me, I'll just write a book about that. But even that felt superficial. It felt, I knew that the information was important, but I felt like I was missing something. So then I really started to get into meditation and prayer, and I would ask every night, what is it that I'm supposed to write about? Please show me, help me make it meaningful, because it really does seem silly just to write a book because a stranger said you're supposed to write a book. So when I started going through the meditation and prayer phase, I began to have a very long period in my life where I was having really profound concepts kind of downloaded to me in my dreams. And that's when I had the real aha moment, because I realized I had come across references to, I refer to it as the sacred science for a very specific reason, but in antiquity it was generally referred to as the one law. And I had read about it, excuse me, 100 different times in all these different books that I had, but I just didn't get it, because for a lot of us, we all tried religion. And so the moment you see the word law, there's instantly that religious stigma to it. And for me personally, I thought, okay, we're talking about religion again, and I would just skip past it. But when I went through that phase where I was having information downloaded to me, that's when I really got it. That's when I really understood, wow, this is really, really, really deep, profound, important, and life-changing stuff. And so once I incorporated that into the book, it was really easy to look back at all of the different sources that I had read who had a piece of it, who at the time, because I didn't understand it, I thought, well, wow, this is really fascinating work, but I couldn't connect it back to the sacred science. So once I understood what it was, I wrote a study guide because I wanted people to be able to go to these resources and look at the piece that they have, because what's so profound about it is there is no one piece. Everything is connected to everything else. So you can't ever read just one researcher's book, because they generally specialize in this one little piece. So the book that I wrote was not only a very personal reflection of the journey that I went on, but also teaches the one law the way it was taught to me, because there really is that saying, you can't get there from here. There are steps that have to be taken in between so that you can so that the unfolding can happen the right way, so that it's not abrasive, it's not going too fast. And so that's really what happened. My life was changed, and because I understood it the way I did and I took the journey the way I did, I tried really hard to kind of duplicate that in a way that I thought other people could find very meaningful in their own lives.
So the one law that you found in all these different places, was it the actual words, the one law, or was it just the metaphors and the teachings from the different books that you were reading that all were describing the same thing?
Well, that's a really good question, because there were definitely sources that I came across that very specifically referenced it by name. And for people familiar with Edgar Cayce's work, that's something he talks about a lot. So I had definitely come across it in his work. I had also, I think a lot of people, if they began with religion, eventually began to move into, as a natural progression, of course, you end up going down the UFO path and also the ancient text path. And I found it again in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And then I came across a man whose name is Professor Edmond Bordeaux-Zeke, who was at one point allowed into the Vatican's private vaults to translate some of the ancient Essene texts that they had. And he also referenced it by name. And for me personally, Edgar Cayce and Professor Zeke are the two greatest sources for helping people understand it, because they really just kind of lay it out, but when you do understand it, that's the moment you can really zero in on all of these other people's teachings and recognize they're teaching it, but they don't know they're teaching it.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, after you understand what it is, you can see it everywhere.
Yes, but until that moment, you really just can't. You know, you come across it, but you don't realize what it is you found. So, and Masaru Emoto is a good example of that, I think, because he doesn't use the phrase. I don't even know if he's familiar with it, but his work is a direct. It's the best source I think you could ever take a person to show them how it works in real time with an image. So it's extraordinary work. But even when I read his books, I didn't understand that he was teaching it to people in his own way without knowing that's really what it was.
Yeah, he's got a really fantastic, or he's in a really fantastic documentary. I think we've got that linked on our video links on the website. What the heck was it called?
You talking about What the Bleep? That one, or?
No, there's another one. Maybe I didn't put it on the website. I think it's called Water, actually. It's called Water.
There's a few. You can find a few of them out on YouTube, and they are just really, really extraordinary.
Yeah.
And really the depth to it, I think, is extraordinary, because even though he showed, you know, through the images of water how consciousness affects our reality, it goes beyond that when you look at the images. So, for example, one particular image he has where they use the word, "I hate you, I will kill you."
Right.
Yeah.
When you look at that, it actually looks like a person holding a bow and arrow getting ready to kill someone. And that's what's so extraordinary about it. So it's not just that the images differ, but it's the way the image reflects the word. And it's really extraordinary.
Can I interject really quick, Crystal?
Of course you can.
I had a dream 2 days ago that completely reflect on that, and you just made me understand it a lot more, like last
Great.
time. So in the dream, there was a person shooting at me, and before he was able to pull the trigger, a line of energy would come out, and then the bullet would come behind it. So I knew where the trajectory of the bullet was coming from. And basically what I got from the dream was that everything you do, you put out this energy, and because energy is, you know, basically light, it goes at that speed, so you're able, if you're tapped in, you're able to see that energy and avoid whatever's coming at you. Do you understand what I mean?
Sure, but I do disagree with the speed of light thing, because quantum entanglement is instantaneous.
Yep.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, so in that particular case, because you saw it happening maybe in a little bit slower motion, did you recognize the person?
No, I didn't recognize the person at all. I was just having fun because I was able to dodge the bullets like Matrix.
Yeah, I was just going to say you had a Matrix moment. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, maybe what you saw was because again, going back to the principle where usually the people in our dreams are us. It's not always the case, but generally it's the case. Maybe that was your way of getting out of a moment. We could call it a karmic moment, where maybe you sent something out and now it's coming back to you, but you're seeing it before it's happening, so you can maybe soften the blow in a way. A lot of people get blindsided by karma in the way people use that term. I mean, I know people, I mean, my son really is a good example. If he says something really flip, he falls down and stubs his toe 2 seconds later. I mean, and people like me, it takes years and years and years before I'll have an experience where something I did to another individual, not realizing what I may have actually done to that person, comes back to me. So it reminds me more of that, because you were able to see it coming. And with quantum entanglement, it's really instantaneous.
Here comes this flash, Ramon.
Yeah, I guess, that's kind of it, right? The wave hit the other shore and it's coming back.
Yeah.
So Ramon. Hey, Crystal.
Hey.
So, back in our antiquity, our ancient past, history, geez, come on, Tom. Religion and science were both one and the same, were they not?
They were the same, absolutely. There was no delineation, no separation. They were taught together.
So I kind of see it, John Last just popped into my mind as far as where that, he goes into the Gnostic mythologies and stuff, and when Judeo-Christian patriarchy came on the scene, it seemed to split science and religion.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good interpretation. I think, for me personally, when I looked at ancient texts and ancient civilizations, especially through Edgar Cayce's work, I went really far back, especially to the days of Atlantis. And this is a really important thing for people to understand. So, and I'm a big believer in synchronicity, and I got an email today from someone who said they had put off listening to some of my interviews because they thought it was going to be more metaphysical mumbo jumbo. And I think people are always surprised to find that it's a very real science, and that when we don't understand it, we abuse it, and we destroy ourselves with it. So you can go very far back in time with it, and I think that what happens is you end up at a place where if you're the survivor of a race who's done this, preserving the records becomes, it's important, but you don't want to just hand it out again, because you go through a phase where the civilization rises and then it falls. And it falls because of the abuse. So you become very leery about how you reintroduce it. So we come from a very high place where all of this was known, then the fall happens, and then you have people who are responsible for re-releasing it incrementally. If some kind of corruption takes place during this process where we're supposed to be back on the upswing phase, and it's not taught properly, meaning only the science is taught and not the sacred, then it again becomes abused, and we are living that now. So did religion play a role in that? I think that religion did, and I think that there were forces that work behind the scenes involved in that, because if you go back to the Essene teachings, and they preserved a lot of this knowledge, but they had brotherhoods. They were very careful about who they let in. They wanted honest people who genuinely wanted to evolve spiritually to have the knowledge. So, for example, you had to be a member of their brotherhood for 7 years before they would even begin to really start to explain it, because they didn't want it to be abused. But in the Essene teachings, what you find generally is you find the tree of life. And this is a very old teaching. It's, of course, you can find it in a lot of, the Kabbalah. You can find it all over the place, but it originates from a very old source. And the way the Essenes taught it generally was that man is half below the ground where the roots of the tree are, and then man is half above the ground. And this, in their interpretation, was you had the earthly mother and you had the heavenly father. Now, the heavenly father in the Essene tradition does not mean what it means in religion. The Essenes understood the sacred science, and they referred to it as the law or the creator, and for them the creator was the law. That's where the laws came from. So for them the heavenly father was the all-knowing creator. But in religion what you have is the heavenly father, and that's it. I mean, you don't even get the earthly mother part. You don't even get that half of it, which is really sad, because we've polluted our planet terribly because we didn't respect the laws of nature. So that's really the problem. So I think what's happened is, and I don't think that anybody would really argue this point, is that things have been so perverted and corrupted, but there is a reason for that, and not a good one. Because when you want people to evolve properly, you give them all of the information when they're ready to have it. And we have not seen that. And this goes back to divide and conquer. So, and for people who started with religion and who may have a very, very bad flavor, left over from it, I would say that the Essene teachings are really beautiful because very few people know that Jesus Christ, who was raised and taught by the Essenes for part of his life, and taught two very specific prayers. He taught a prayer to the Heavenly Father, and he also taught a prayer to the earthly mother. In his mind, they were equal. So really what happened was we had people who wanted to abuse it for control over others. And in order to do that, you have to leave parts of it out. Otherwise, if you give the whole truth to someone else, they can use it for themselves. So we found ourselves in this place where duality is a word that really strikes a nerve these days. And the word duality is something I really want to talk about because the interpretation of it, again, did not come from our own minds. It's another one of those things we really need to ditch in terms of the way we view it, because we were taught to view it through the eyes of separation, which goes back to divide and conquer. So I really want to talk about that word for a moment. It comes from its Latin root, which is duo, which means binary or made or based on two things or parts. The word dual is a reference to two, the number two, of course, but it also means consisting of two parts or elements having two like parts, or having a double character or nature. Now, that's a really beautiful way to explain it because the fact is that every human being on this planet has a dual character or nature, and the reason for that is because we are divinity in flesh. So you can't separate them. You can't say, well, I'm just a soul, because I'm not just a soul. I'm a soul living in a body having the experience of Crystal Clark in the material world. So, and it's the same for everyone. So whenever we get into a space of duality where it's not, where we don't see it as two halves of the whole operating in harmony, when it's perverted, what we get is it's me against you, it's us against them, it's man against woman, it's government versus religion, it's always against, not with or part of. And I think that's something really important that we have to pay attention to because that's how divide and conquer works.
So you believe that this idea itself, it's very psychologically damaging over the last, 2,000 years?
No, more than that.
Yeah. It really has been much, much longer than that, but it's not psychologically damaging unless it's manipulated. It's very psychologically powerful and freeing, and it helps the world make so much more sense if we understand it properly, but that has not been the path that we were offered.
No, yeah, I meant in the way we understand it now, not...
Exactly, in the way that we were taught to understand it. Because if there's no competition, you don't have war, first of all, right? You can't divide people if they understand that they are by their very nature part of each other. You can't. So the divide and conquer thing has a lot to do with twisting perceptions that are very, very old perceptions. And a really good example of that, of course, is the swastika. That is a very, very ancient symbol found all over the world, and it has nothing to do with enslaving a race. It's the exact opposite. But if you and I were to paint that on our doorstep today, we would be...
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, are you kidding? Our neighbors would hate us and call the news, and, it would be this big terrible thing. So that's kind of what I mean, that we live in a world where really beautiful and profound and very deep truths have been twisted so that we either, in the case of the swastika, when we see that, what kind of energy do we send to it? So we've kind of undone it through the energy that we associate with it, and that is done very intentionally. And that's something we really need to get past. So when people say, well, there's duality this and there's duality that, what they're saying is, I don't like that word because that word means something against something else, something versus something else, when in fact, you have to have both halves. You cannot separate one from the other.
So
So,
that sounds exactly to me like how the Chinese would call it the yin and the yang.
Absolutely.
well, that's, in a way,
The
and,
way
that, and
you're
that's something,
explaining it sounds like the yin and the yang. Yeah.
right, that's something that I want to talk about because there is a wrongful association to duality in terms of good and evil, or right and wrong. So when we say, if we use it's a spiritual term, but it's also a scientific term. So if we use the term integration versus disintegration, what we're talking about are motive forces, or male energy and female energy, if we want to look at it that way. So when we say a motive force, that's not in the context of I have a motive or an agenda. It's in the context of movement, the way energy flows. So we have these motive forces that move things. And I think that's where people get hung up with duality is the idea that this somehow implies good versus evil. Now, does evil exist? Evil does exist. And that seems so contrary to the entire idea of duality, but that's where the one law is so helpful, because by what yardstick do you measure evil? How do you know what that is? And that's where the sacred science really comes in handy, because evil does exist. And once we know how to define it, then we have a better grasp of, are we participating? Because a very key component to all of these things happening right now, and when I say all of these things, I mean all of these things in terms of chemtrails, fluoride in the water, HAARP, scalar weapons, all of these things going on, they were allowed to be perpetuated through ignorance. So to go back to an example that I used with both of you last time was the giving my son fluoride when he was an infant. Okay? The proper definition of evil, based on our ancestors and their understanding of the sacred science, is the purposeful and willful denial of life to thrive. It's purposeful and willful. It's done on purpose. So when I gave my son fluoride drops, was I denying his right to thrive? I absolutely was. But was I doing it on purpose? No. So there's a very real distinction needs to be made between ignorance and evil, but I think what's really important for people to understand is that the reason the populace is so dumbed down is because evil cannot thrive without ignorance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Because if you're not ignorant, then you wouldn't let it happen.
Exactly. Bingo. Yes, that's exactly it. So if I had known that fluoride was toxic, would I have given it to my infant? No. And this very same thing goes on in all of these black projects and all of the stuff they've got going on, because all of these scientists working on these projects, whether it's bioweapons or whatever it is, will tell you that it's compartmentalized. Why do they do that? They do it to perpetuate ignorance, because if these people knew how the little piece of what they were working on was going to be implemented in terms of the whole intent, they wouldn't do it. So for me personally, that's why teaching the sacred science is so important, because when we don't know all of these little teeny tiny laws that create, uphold, restore, and regenerate life, if we don't know what they are, we don't know, A, when they're being broken by others, or B, when we've been conned into breaking them ourselves, which is a very difficult situation, and that's the situation we have now, because we are literally aiding in our own demise, having been conned into believing it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And that's not good. So it's an important thing, but it's not. It is a science, which is how they abuse it. They know it, and we don't. But imagine if you and I lived in a world where everybody knew it. Nobody could abuse it without it standing out like a sore thumb, right?
Right.
So
Getting us to that point in our world right now with 6 people owning all the media, all the main media, and is so controlled. Thank God for the internet.
Yeah, but I mean, it's one thing I'm noticing, for example, what's to change the subject just a little bit, and then we'll come back to what you were saying. With what's happening over in Tunisia and Egypt, um, that's something that I see that it's gonna spread out because people are getting tired, and some people are getting tired and they don't know what they're getting tired of. But
Exactly.
but they know that this is not right. They have that feeling. I mean, people are dumbed down, but I in their true nature, I don't think they're that ignorant, that dumb. You can sense when something's wrong.
You know, that's true. And when I use the word ignorance, I don't mean it in a derogatory sense of a person being stupid. And that's something I really, really, really want people to understand. That's not the way that I mean it. This is something that really bothers me, and I see it more and more and more, because I think that for the aware observer, given what's going on behind the scenes by what I just refer to as shadow, shadow watches what we do and say in the alternative media. It watches, are we waking up? Are we catching on? How much do we know? And whenever we get really close to something, then they turn around and spin it in the mainstream media so that they've reached people who don't know what's going on before you and I get to them. And then, of course, we go back to the, the perverted version of duality again, right? What is so frustrating for me is, and you can find this everywhere, and I'm sure you guys have seen it, most people have, whether it's population control, well, we're just a bunch of dummies, right? I mean, all we're going to do is reproduce and breed and consume until the planet explodes. So they need to do something about it because they're smarter than we are. And what I really, really hate about that is they gave us the reality we are living out and are now turning on us and saying, well, look how ignorant you are. That's the connection people have to make. They don't get to look down on people and say that we just are unintelligent, like a virus that consumes its host, when in fact they worked very, very hard to ensure we wouldn't know any better. And that's what I find so difficult. So believe me, when I use the word ignorance, I don't mean it in a derogatory way, because was I ignorant that fluoride was a toxin? Yeah. Did that make me a bad person? No. If I had known, I wouldn't have given it to my son, that's for sure. But I didn't know. And there were people working very hard behind the scenes to make sure I wouldn't know so that I would poison my son. So that's the context that I hope that people will start viewing the world from, because they know it. They worked hard to make sure we wouldn't know it. And now we have a situation where they're trying to turn people against each other by saying, well, there's too many people on the planet. Well, first of all, there's not. That's
There
a
isn't.
misnomer. Right. So, and the carbon taxes that we talked about last time, it's a very easy thing to get people to aid in their own demise if you keep them ignorant of what they need to live. So when people say they're going to start these carbon taxes, and that's a good thing, because if we can't get a hold of our carbon footprint, we're going to kill the planet. Well, that's nonsense, because we're carbon-based life forms. But if people are not taught that, then they look at what a person says, and all the officials, right? Well, these are really smart people. They must know what they're talking about. So we better, kill off all of our cows and do all this stuff because it's emitting carbon. Well, of course they are. That's what they're designed to do. That's a part of the laws that give us life. So, but when you know that, and they start saying, well, we're going to have to start taking all these things away from you, it should instantly come to the forefront of a person's mind. They're trying to take life away from me.
Well, people are starting to, I think the quote-unquote light workers that are out there that are putting their energy out, doing the group meditations, just being and learning for themselves, which puts out their own vibration in the world around them. I think those people are actually getting that vibration out to the world to where things will start giving just your run-of-the-mill Joe, that little tickle in his mind when those things come across his table, you know. They're,
Mhm. That kind of reminds me. It's kind of when people have epiphanies or certain situations that they go, oh crap. I kind of almost feel like sometimes it's our higher guides, but other times I feel it's either the 100 monkey effect or another person putting out that intention.
that are just
Yeah.
personally
Yeah.
identifying what they're doing, being able being able to, well, like the first step to solving a problem is identifying it.
Exactly. That's exactly it. That's the key. That's really it. Now, I think where people enjoy the way I present the sacred science is because I do it, I try to approach it from the left brain first, which is the weaponization of it. And that's not always a pretty thing, I know, because we shouldn't have done it. But when you realize that this is a very real science, then you have to begin to accept your connection to it, which is what Masaru Emoto's work is so important in terms of doing that. And once you realize that you have that kind of personal power, A, you immediately realize that it was hidden from you because somebody else wanted to use it. And then B, you get, why is it so important for me to live from the heart? Why do so many metaphysical teachers say that love is the answer, right? Why is that so important? So for me personally, I get it when people email me and say, well, I didn't want to listen to your interview because I thought it was going to be a bunch of, new age hippie love, light, and, unicorns and glitter. But the fact of the matter is that regardless of how you approach it, when you know the kind of power that you as an individual have, you come to the conclusion that the best way for you to use it is from the heart. And that's a really important thing. And so it's kind of funny. I know we're really going far off track, but this is where it went, so let's go with it. Most people know, I'm sorry, not Edgar Cayce, but Masaru Emoto for his water crystals. But for me personally, one of the most profound things that he discovered was, and again, this goes back to the one law, because remember that the one law teaches people how to understand how energy flows and how every energy that goes out interacts with other energies. You cannot avoid it. That is a law that cannot be changed. That's the way it works. What was so extraordinary to me beyond the water crystals or even the rice experiment that you did, Tom, which worked out really great, is that he was taking samples of the water in Tokyo one day, and he noticed that the vibrations of things like lead and mercury that were very, very toxic and harmful to the human body that were in the water spiked really, really high that day. And it was unusual, and he wasn't sure why. And then he discovered that he took this reading on the first day of the first Gulf War. And that's the kind of thing that people have to understand, is that the one law is based on frequency and resonance. And a lot of people think, or vibration, however you want to look at it, and a lot of people think that this is, New Age stuff, but Edgar Cayce was talking about this stuff in the 30s. So this has been known for a very long time, but things resonate with each other. And so you could say that there are frequencies of life and there are frequencies of death. That's a super, super simplistic way to look at it, because you can use frequencies of life to create life out of death. It goes back and forth, but for just a super simple way to look at it through this example, what Masaru Emoto discovered is that when we murdered people and began pounding the earth and shedding blood on it in another part, in another part of the world, it literally affected every single thing that vibrated with death and amplified it that day. That's what people have to understand. So when we say, yes, it is a real technology, meaning that you can weaponize it, you can do extraordinary things with it in terms of healing, but it's also a very spiritual technology, because you realize that if we had learned to love and accept people, would there have been a war? No. So when this war happened, while all these people were being poisoned through their tap water, there was a connection. There was an energetic connection. So if we had began the path of love and avoided the war, we would have avoided the planet feeling it, and then we would have avoided people in Tokyo exposing themselves to really high doses of harmful frequencies on the same day. So that's the kind of feedback loop I'm talking about when I say that, yes, it's a very spiritual technology, but it's also a very real technology. So from that example, I guess we could probably move ahead to Raymond Rife and Dr. Hulda Clark so that people can get a feel for how this works. And you guys are familiar with Rife,
Right.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Right. And so he used frequency in a very positive way, in a very healing way, and he called it the MOR, which stands for Mortal Oscillatory Rate. And basically what he did was he discovered that if you knew the frequency of a pathogen in the body, because it has such a different frequency than the body, if you use its own frequency against itself at an amplified rate, you could destroy the pathogen without destroying anything else in the human body. Now, this is a one-law technology. It's based on the laws of frequency and energy and vibration and the way those things interact. So when we look at that, we have to ask ourselves, well, why do we have cancer drugs? Why do we have, why do we even have a pharmaceutical industry? I mean, honestly, does it make sense? And of course, they're discovering that all of this stuff that we ingest doesn't get completely broken down in the body, so we are eliminating it into our water when we flush our toilets, and then it's going back out into nature again. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense. So now Dr. Hulda Clark, there are a lot of different ways that you can use it, and the examples I'm giving now are for upholding and regenerating life. And Dr. Hulda Clark used it in a different way. She used a positive offset frequency. And in that way, what she did was, if she knew the frequency, let's say, just for the sake of example, that this particular pathogen vibrated to the frequency of 6, we'll say. Well, she could use a negative 6 and then eliminate it back to a 0. Does that make sense? So basically canceling it out. And that also works. So you can do it a lot of different ways. And a lot of different healers who work with plants have had very similar circumstances where it's the frequency of the plant. You can match it to the frequency of a disease, and you can do it both ways. Again, if the frequency of the plant is the same as the disease, but at a higher oscillatory rate, you can kill the pathogen that caused the disease or the energetic imbalance with this frequency. So that's kind of the point that I was trying to make earlier. When going back to the idea of ignorance, and of course, again, I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I'm saying that it was planned. Because if you and I understood that we could just go, say I had, say I had arthritis, but I could go eat almonds and make it go away. Well, where's all the money to be made? Through the drugs, right? So it's really important that people get the sacred science back. And the other really incredible thing about this, too, is in terms of the sun. We have a lot of people saying, well, the sun's going to do all these terrible things and it's going to cook us all. But what's really important for people to understand is that the one law is fractal. So, for example, if you've seen a picture of an atom, it looks like a mini solar system. On the scale, if you move up the scale, we have a solar system. And then our solar system and even the galaxy that we're in are also revolving around other things. So it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the size of the energetic wave is really important, meaning that all of humanity and our emotions ripple out into our solar system. And everything is like this, and this is similar to that dream that you had, where whatever we send out hits a distant shore and it commingles with the energy it comes into contact with, and then it bounces back to us. In Masaru Emoto's work, it's a much smaller scale, meaning that if a person said something really beautiful to the water, you would have all of these really beautiful crystals that when you drink the water, it's very healthy and life-sustaining for you. But if you say really awful things to the water, or if you put toxic chemicals that are anti-life in the water, it's very harmful for you. So it's a very, very simple, small lesson that I think a lot of people miss, because what we're doing to the world, we take up again. Excuse me, and that was really, for me, one of the most profound lessons of Dr. Masaru Emoto's work is not just that you can say a pretty word to water and it makes a great crystal, but what does that mean? It means that we are co-creators and that we experience what we co-create, which is why it's so important to become consciously engaged in the process. And it's the same thing with the sun. And this is something Edgar Cayce talks about, in that sunspots are a reflection of our turmoil. And then it becomes reflected back to us in solar activity that's not really great. So it's just really more of a grander scale of what Masaru Emoto did with the water. So I think that's why it's so important for people to understand, because all of these little laws that create, sustain, regenerate, and uphold life can be broken through ignorance or can be used intentionally as the energy becomes redirected back in on itself in a very negative way in terms of weaponization.
We've got a good example. We've got a good example of the interaction of the sun with what's happening here. Today is January 30th, and January 28th, when a lot of this stuff was going on over in Egypt and Tunisia and all these riots and stuff, there was a significant solar flare that came off of the sun just the other day. So.
And that shouldn't surprise people. I mean, it really shouldn't. And really quick, Ramon, before you jump in here, I want to recommend this book to people. It's called Dynamic Astrology, and it's by John Townley. And it very specifically says in here that, I'm going to read just a quick example out of it, because I meant to, so I have it ready. And it says, the amount of solar radiation we receive, which is determined by the sunspot cycle, may have profound historical significance. Soviet professor A.C. Chayvisky has correlated the 11-year cycle with what he calls a worldwide mass excitement cycle. He found that throughout history, events such as wars, migrations, crusades, uprisings, and revolutions have clustered around peak sunspot periods. Now, what's interesting is that the government did research on this and suppressed the results because they had to have understood it's working in reverse. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because why would you hide that? I mean, wouldn't you want people to know, hey, if we act all crazy and we start killing ourselves and doing all these terrible things, the sun's going to get upset and we're going to feel it because the ripple goes out, mingles with the sun, and comes back to us.
Who is it?
Wouldn't you? Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you want people to know that? So I can tell you that I personally am very, very leery of people who say the government is forecasting a very turbulent sun cycle. Why are they forecasting it? That should be considered.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And as you're talking about the sun, this idea popped in my head, and the idea, the same as with the bacteria, when you add the same frequency and its opposite, it kills it but doesn't damage anything else. What if the sun does something like this? So you have like the Mayans and all these different people saying you have to raise your vibration, you have to raise your vibration, because maybe the sun is going to do something like that. And right now I'm just guessing and having this idea that I feel like the sun's vibration can have the same effect. So if you're on a certain vibration, then you're okay. But if you're on a lower vibration, then it can be very damaging.
Well, that's a good way to look at it to a degree. And this is why I'm so grateful to you guys that you were so gracious to offer to do a series with me, because even though we're kind of retracing some steps here and kind of starting at the beginning, because everything is so connected to everything else. It's never just one thing. And so the more shows we do together, the more we can really get down into the details of how all of these other things are connected to everything else. Yes, we do have an effect on the sun, but the sun is also affected by all of the other planets in our solar system. And the other planets in our solar system are affected by other things outside of the solar system, and it just goes on and on and on into infinity. So, in fact, kind of an interesting development has been a couple of different researchers that I've been looking at lately regarding the Mayan calendar in 2012. And one of them is John Major Jenkins, and the other one, I want to say his first name is Carl, but I know his last name is Kalaman. Does that ring a bell?
That's correct, Carl Kalaman.
Yeah. So now these two people, they have somewhat different ideologies about what's going to happen in 2012. And I've noticed that some people have a tendency to choose one person over the other, which to me is odd because I think that they're both right. And the reason for that is, and this is, I've not researched a lot of their teaching in depth, so if I'm butchering it, I'm sorry, but this is just my general interpretation of it, but it still works for example's sake. But if I understand it properly, John Major Jenkins is looking at it more from a planetary alignment perspective, meaning that it's the way the planets are moving, causing this kind of new thing, this new phase. And from Kalaman's perspective, the Mayans moved beyond. They were seeing cycles that were beyond our solar system. And I think that they're both right, because there are solar system cycles that we have. The other planets, the way that they affect the sun, do cause problems. But there are cycles within cycles within cycles within cycles. And it goes on infinitum. So I agree with both of them. I think, in a way, it kind of makes sense, sometimes, not always, but from a left brain perspective, it helps to look at the Mayan calendar in terms of cogs and wheels. So all of these wheels have these teeth on them, and they're all connected to these other teeth. And so when one wheel turns, it turns another one. So in that way, it really helps to look at it through astrology. But I think if you go beyond the astrology of just our solar system, and you look at it more from a perspective of tumblers in a lock, meaning that I'm sure you guys have seen those locks they have, not the ones that turn, where you turn the number to the right and the left, but the ones that have the numbers 1 through 9 on them, and then you have to, it's a number combination.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to know the combination to get it to unlock. I think that that's, in a way, maybe a better way to look at it, because the planets and all of these different energies, when certain things happen, you get what we could say the tumblers have unlocked something new to come in. And that's what 2012 is about. So even the sun, I mean, just everything is so connected to everything else. It's not just us affecting the sun. It's not just the planets in our solar system affecting the sun, which is why we have people talking about incoming energies from space. In War 101, I talked about it from the perspective that the way I knew the sacred science, I understood that all of this is about evolutionary pressure. And that's what it's for. And so in order to be pushed to evolve to the next stage, you would need a new type of energy. Does that,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because, yeah, otherwise we just go in circles. You would need a new pressure. So I had no idea where it would come from, but I understood that it would have to come from the outside, and it could very well be a situation where not so much the cogs in the wheels, but the tumblers in the lock, something is being unlocked, and now the energy is coming through. And I would imagine, though, that it's also cyclical. So, and I think really, in general, that's a source of frustration for me, because I'm not an expert in any of this stuff. I don't do, I'm not a numerologist. I don't do astrology for a living. But because I understand the sacred science, it's easy for me to see how all of these things are connected. So whenever you deal with a researcher who only specializes in one very particular thing, it's great that they do that, because they really drill down deep and give us a lot of details. But a lot of times what will happen is, maybe in this particular case, and I'm not saying these two people don't like each other, I'm just using it as an example, so I don't want it to be misunderstood, but what does happen a lot of times is that this researcher will, because they specialize in this one aspect, it's like they've carved out a niche for themselves. Don't come into my space and I won't come into yours, right? A lot of researchers are like that. They don't want to work together.
Yeah.
But this evolutionary pressure that we are being put under is telling us that we have to. That is the next phase. We have to learn to work together. It's perfectly fine for, Tom to specialize in one thing and Ramon to specialize in another thing and me to specialize in another thing. But but imagine what the three of us could do if we got together, right?
Absolutely.
That's what's being asked of us. And that's the direction that humanity is going to have to go in if they want the kind of future that they deserve to have, and overcoming a lot of not just the perversion behind duality, but teaching people the sacred science is really, really important, because once you know how all of these little things interact with each other, the moment somebody comes to you and says, well, hey, you know what? Every 25 years the sun acts up, so just deal with it. I mean, that's not right. Does the sun have a cycle that may be this long or that long? Well, sure, but there are other factors involved. And for us as individuals who've really kind of been duped for a very long time, having this knowledge hidden from us, if we could relearn it and work together, we could immediately turn this all around. And I'll give you another really quick example that I think is really, really important for people to understand. And maybe after I give it, if you guys feel like it's necessary, I can put it into a deeper context through quantum theory. But
Crystal, would you like to save this for the second hour? We've got 2 minutes left here on the first hour for BBS.
Oh, sure. Well, I'll just say what it is. It's about what John Hutchison did in the Gulf of Mexico. Are you guys aware of that?
Yes.
Really important stuff. Okay. So that's what I would like to talk about when we come back.
Okay. Well, everybody, you guys, there's your little teaser for you for the second hour. You can catch a second hour of this month's conversation with Crystal on our archive page, and that's conscious-tv.com. Crystal's website is thesoulsociety.com. That's the TheSolSociety.com. Visit there. She's got some wonderful insights in her blog. Read her blog page. She's got some good stuff there.
And make sure you grab her book. Both of them are wonderful books, very insightful.
All three of them. I haven't got the third one. Are you done with that yet, Crystal? You're done with that?
No, I'm working on it right now, actually.
You're not done yet?
With the third one? No, I know. I'm really trying hard for the end of summer, but really doing this show with you guys is really important to me too, because it kind of gives people a better feel for what kind of, the kinds of things they can learn through it.
Okay, everybody, we'll see you in the archives, and we'll see everybody who doesn't make it there next week. Good night.